Hi everyone, it's Kimber, the Study Abroad Specialist. In today's video, I'm going to talk about what it means if your school loses their certification for the Student and Exchange Visitor Program with the U.S. government. So welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you are new here, please subscribe and also like this video. I am here to make your study abroad journey a lot easier. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I'm excited to talk about this today. So I'm going to be talking about the SEVP program, so the Student and Exchange Visitor Program. So this particular program is important because schools in the U.S. need this so that they can host students who are international. So essentially, this is the program that is in connection with the U.S. government to be able to have schools issue the I-20 form, which gets you the F1 visa. So it's very important, and any school who accepts international students is required to be in this program. And it's a little bit timely. I usually don't like to date my videos, but we are in the year of 2025. So there have been a lot of different changes with a lot of different schools here in the US. But regardless of who is in the White House and different things, there's not just direct reasons why people can lose it, at least the schools can lose it. And so I want you to be aware of that and what that means if your school does lose their certification and how that may impact you if you are an international student. So when it comes to the SEVP certification, one of the important things to know is that, as I mentioned before, this is really important because this is, if you want to think about it as being a connector between your school that you want to attend or your study abroad program or whatever it's going to be and the U.S. government to be able to allow you to come to the country. So the I-20 form is the most important form that you need, and schools, whether they are high schools, private schools, boarding schools, or if they're going to be at the university college level, they have to be an SEVP program certified school to be able to issue you the I-20 form. And the I-20 form is what you're going to need. It's like the holy grail form to be able to get you an F1 visa. So it's very important. And there are a variety of reasons why schools actually lose their certification. I know that over the past 6 months, if you're watching this in 2025, there have been a little bit more, it's been more highlighted, but it doesn't really matter, like I was saying before, who's in government, who's in power. There are other reasons why people lose that. And so I actually want to share some examples with you of why schools could lose that. So if you're ever in that situation, you'll sort of understand that it may not even be politically motivated. So for example, I will share right now a story about a school in Florida. So in Florida, back in 2019, there was a school called Academic High School. So it's in Miami. And this particular school actually lost their certification in January of 2019. And the primary reason was because they were not compliant with reporting. And so with reporting, one of the things that's really important about this, and this is something that is an ongoing conversation and is actually very valid with the US government, it's been ongoing for years and years, is that you have to make sure that your records are up to date. And unfortunately, as a student, there's only so much that you can do on that. I know that for a lot of students, they're really involved about making sure that the school has all their update information, that they have their updated information on their grades, all of that. But it comes down a lot of time to the school. And I will just say that overall, this is not targeting that particular school or whatever happened with them. But a lot of times, especially when you're in larger bureaucracies, people can be lazy. They just don't do what they need to do. This is just a fact. We all know this. And so it's not to say that in this particular case, I was not there. I don't know what happened. But it is very plausible that whoever was running it or whoever was over it was just lazy and didn't figure out how to do it, or maybe it was a different situation where they just didn't stay up to date with it. But it's a very big deal. I mean, it's not a situation where it's common every day that people are losing their SEVP status. So it had to be a lot more egregious to be able to do that. So to point that out, going back to what happened in Academic High School, One of the things that was important to note is that the students who were there on an F1 visa and other visas, they were allowed to stay temporarily, but they had to transfer to other schools, out of risk of being kicked out of the country. So again, it goes back to when someone makes a dumb mistake or they don't do their job, it impacts a lot of people. And one of the lessons that's really important to think about too is that a lot of times people feel like, well, I'm not in a college and or a university, and so maybe if I'm at a smaller school, because this particular school was very small, that things are going to be taken care of. It does not matter. We live in a world today where people are just not on top of it. And unfortunately, you will not be like that when you move forward because you watch this channel and other channels. But a lot of people just don't care. And so it's just kind of keeping in mind that it can happen even to small schools. The next example that I want to share is from a school in New York. This was also in 2019, and they lost their certification when their school was shut down. So this is something too that happens, and it doesn't again happen every day. But there are lots of schools that end up shutting down. They don't have funding, they don't have enough enrollment, and it can happen very quickly. And these are even schools that have been around for a long time. And usually what happens is they have like a 60 to 90-day notice. It's not a lot of time. And for students who are in the country, they're panicking around. But think about for a student like you, an international student, you've invested everything to come to this country, and then all of a sudden you have 90 days to figure it all out. That can be very traumatic. And with this particular school, it's called American Language Communication Center, and it closed its operations, and so everything had to go away. But one of the important things was that, as I was saying, suddenly students didn't have any I-20. And so that means that they were technically in the country legally. What do you actually do when it goes away? So what actually happened was that the administration at that school was able to help students to be able to quickly find new language schools, which was great. So I give them props on that, being able to move forward with that. But just thinking about in that time period of feeling like, okay, I'm here and I could get kicked out at any minute, what's going on? It's very scary. And with this particular situation, even though they would have had more of a notice period, for an international student, you're really trying to figure out, well, what am I going to be able to do? Because without that I-20 and without the F1 visa, everything sort of crashes down. And so that's going to be something important to note. One of the things that you can sort of do, I think that you should feel empowered to do it. I even actually did this when I was in the UK, and I didn't really need to worry about it because my school is more than certified and has a long legacy. But you actually have the right. You have the right to talk to someone in admissions, talk to someone in administration, even about the health of the school. You want to understand what's going on, and they actually have the right to do that, especially in a private school. Now in public schools it's different. They're run by districts, and in public colleges a lot of it, the funding is a lot different, and so it's not, I mean, you can do this, but in private schools specifically, where a lot of times people are paying full tuition, you have a right to know what the health of the school is. Even if you don't actually get to speak to someone, go through and read through the annual reports. Check out that information to understand, is this school in trouble? And if it is, maybe it's not the right place for you. Just to kind of understand, is the school in a lot of debt? Do they have a lot of scandals going on? What's going to happen? That's something that I feel like a lot of students overlook. And I understand, like, you may not be thinking about that, but you have the right to know before you get involved with it. It's a lot easier if you're going to, let's say, a more brand name school, brand name boarding school, or whatever. But if you're going to a smaller school, you also definitely want to check that out to understand, what is the situation here? Has something like this happened before? Could I be in jeopardy? Just so that you're staying ahead of it. So just sort of keep that in mind. You're not being paranoid, you're just being proactive. So I'm actually taking you all around the country today because another example that I have for you is in 2018, Silicon Valley University in San Jose, California. They actually voluntarily withdrew from the SEVP in 2018. And so one of the reasons why they were doing this, the primary reason, is because they were on the cusp of losing their accreditation and sort of stripping their particular relationship with the government.
This evening, thousands of students with their dreams crushed. The education they hoped would lead to a career in tech is now in limbo. Silicon Valley University abruptly shut down. KPIX5's Devin Feely says not the first time the school has been under scrutiny. Devin?
Yeah, that's right. Silicon Valley University has been under investigation and at risk of going under for some time, but the loss of its accreditation was the first domino to fall, and that allowed the state to move in quickly to shut it down.
Canceled classes and empty chairs. That's what we found today at Silicon Valley University. That and one lone student sitting in the library, pondering his future and the future of the school he once proudly attended.
My friends, they had suffered a lot, because of this university.
It's been a dramatic reversal of fortunes for SVU, which until recently boasted an international student body of nearly 4,000, men and women who traveled halfway around the world for the promise of a quality education and for the potential to work in the Valley's tech industry.
The guys from other countries, abroad countries, they have so many dreams, right? They want to come here and they want to get more knowledge and studying masters.
But in December, the university lost its accreditation. The state should have been notified at the time, but was not, only learning about it months later. State regulators have now shut the school down. But it's not the first time SVU has been under a cloud of suspicion. 2 years ago, we reported that several of their students had been denied entry into the U.S., sent back to their native India, as the Department of Homeland Security cracked down on so-called visa mills, an accusation the school at the time adamantly denied.
Our students here are very upset with the whole thing because they know the university is a legitimate university.
Today, the university laid the blame at the feet of its co-founder, Jerry Shao, writing Silicon Valley University's loss of accreditation is based on alleged acts and omissions that occurred during Dr. Shao's tenure as president. Dr. Shao is no longer with the university. We are taking all actions necessary to regain our accreditation. But for current and former students, that promise is as empty as the school's hallways.
They lost money and they lost time.
Now, while the university says it is working diligently to restore its accreditation, they could not provide a timeline for when that might happen or when they might be able to reopen their doors.
Devin, I don't even know if this is possible, but what would the school have to do to reopen?
Yeah, it's a very high hurdle. There's basically 3 things that they would need to do. First, they've got to get their accreditation back. That can be a time-consuming and laborious process. There was already a state investigation that was underway even before all of this happened. They've got to resolve that. And then they would also have to reapply to the state for approval to operate here in California.
Yeah, not going to be easy or quick. All right, Devin Feely, thanks so much.
For accreditation, it's really important to understand what the status of the accreditation is with the government. And the other thing to know too is that for some schools, if it's going to be, let's say, a high school, or it's going to be a maybe smaller college, a lot of times it's more regional accredited. It may not be accredited by Washington, D.C., but the type of accreditation, is your school at risk of knowing that? Again, this is making you proactive to understand what sort of shape is my school in, because all of this impacts you. And again, as an international student, you're going to be facing it a lot differently than someone who is a native born student that can just pack up and transfer to another school. You have different levels of things to worry about. So I have 2 more examples for you. So there was another smaller university in California, and this particular school back in 2016, they actually had their SEVP status revoked. And this was because they were essentially practicing fraud. And again, this is not common, not happening every day, but it could happen. Essentially, they were operating as a visa mill. And so what that means, and I can do another video on this about the importance of making sure that you get a visa through a valid place. Because what they were doing is they were not only issuing the I-20, but they were also sort of going through and on the forms, not actually showing what the students were going to do. So it was lying. And then also in a lot of the examples that they gave students, they were also saying that they could issue the visa. Again, I'm not trying to scare you with any of these examples, but I am just saying that it's important to be aware. A lot of schools like this too, and I will do another video on this about sort of predatory loans and how they reach out to students on that, because if you're doing one thing, you're doing all things. And so you just want to be aware of that it can happen, for the average school that most international students are going to come and go to, it's going to be on the up and up. You're going to be fine. But this is, again, another example of what happens. Then the last example is just very recent. So with Harvard, everything that happened in January through May 2025, and how the certification of the SEVP, particularly targeting students who had views that go against the overall U.S. government, which is our longstanding, and again, this is not my personal opinion either way, but our longstanding country's views that we as a country tend to stand with Israel. And so students, again, going through that process of getting on campuses, and again, I've said this in previous videos, how you do have freedom of speech in America, but you also have to deal with the consequences of that. And as an international student, you have to be aware that you don't have a right to be here. We are giving you a privilege, and this is for any country. So when I was in the UK, when I was in Italy, when I was in other places I didn't have the right to be there either. They were allowing me. I was a guest. And so that means that you have to be on the up and up and behave. And so I'm not defending it either way, but I'm just saying that that makes people much more of a target. And particularly when you're in a hypercharged political environment, you don't want to give any reason to be able to have yourself taken out of that. But that doesn't happen all the time either. And just being aware that that is something that can happen, especially if a school like Harvard is targeted.
At Harvard, international students are back and unboxing, and for now, the university remains unbowed. The Trump administration tried to revoke visas for the foreign enrollees who make up nearly 1/3 of the university's student body. But that effort was blocked in May by a federal judge considering Harvard's lawsuit, accusing the administration of retaliating against the school for defying Trump's political demands, leaving students like Alfred Williamson of Wales free to return.
The fact that the administration is clearly interfering in Harvard's autonomy is a clear indication that something's going seriously wrong in this country. Universities have always been the pillars of freedom of speech, freedom of thought in the American democracy, and now that has been threatened by the current Trump administration that's trying to take away their autonomy.
Trump has made Harvard the epicenter of an educational culture war.
We want nothing less than $500 million from Harvard. Don't negotiate, Linda. They've been very bad. Don't negotiate.
Trump wants that $500 million penalty for the university and a list of changes to reshape the culture at Harvard, which he calls too liberal and too willing to tolerate anti-Semitism. Following campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza, Trump has revoked nearly $3 billion in federal grants. Harvard is a key test case in Trump's campaign to remake higher education. It's not just the nation's oldest university, it's also the richest in the world, with an endowment of $53 billion. So advocates of academic freedom wonder, if it is forced to capitulate to Trump, what chance do other universities have? Recently, Harvard has taken steps of its own to placate the president, eliminating diversity programs, removing Middle Eastern scholars, and ending a partnership with a Palestinian university in favor of new pacts with Israeli institutions.
Universities should not be doing things under political duress. We should not be doing them because somebody said either you do this or we're going to punish you somehow. And unfortunately, it seems like that's what's happening. That's what Harvard is doing.
Now, across the U.S., advocates of academic freedom are urging Harvard to hold the line. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So now that I probably scared you to your wits' end with all these examples, what I want to do now is transition into sort of making it more clear about what this actually means if something like this were to happen, what your rights are, and what you need to do next. So the first thing that it actually means is, again, that the I-20 form, regardless of whether it's going to be that their status was revoked or the school shut down or there was fraud, whatever happened, that it's immediately going to impact your I-20 status. Because again, the I-20 status and the F1 are like brother and sister, basically, or cousins. Like, they talk to each other. And so if the I-20, for whatever reason, can no longer be valid, it means that the F1 is automatically obsolete. And so what that means is that you have to basically act quickly to stay in status. Now, depending on what the situation is for why the certification is being lost, you may have a little bit more time. So for example, that school in New York that shut down, they had, I think it was up to 120 days to help people figure out a new solution. And again, they work with the government on that. That's a lot different than suddenly a school pulling out and figuring out, okay, like the accreditation isn't going to work. So students have to scramble a lot more. And typically, even though it may not be in writing, but you also too want to, again, I'm giving you a lot of homework to do, but you also too want to understand what is the school's right to be able to help you along. So like that school in New York, they helped people transfer to other schools and figure it out. But for, let's say, the school in San Jose that was shutting down, students had to act really quickly. And so, and it was on their own. And so you want to be aware of what that actual process is going to look like at your school if something were to happen. Again, you're not walking around paranoid, but these are questions that people don't ask because people think that for whatever reason, everybody's got it. Like they've got it figured out. I do not walk through life like that. I walk through like thinking that no one's got it figured out. And so I always need to understand. And that has served me well because people are just not on top of it. And so you have to advocate for yourself and sort of understand what's going on. So what you'll want to do, again, is sort of figure out, especially if you're going to, let's say, a smaller school or a school that doesn't have a lot of weight behind it. If you're going to a more branded school, they themselves don't want to be embarrassed. And so they're going to take every precaution they need to be able to move forward and make sure that they stay up to date. But you just want to be aware of that you don't want to fall out of status. Now, what do you do if this happens? So you wake up, you're out of school, and suddenly you find out, oh my goodness, you get an email, your status is being suspended. What do you actually do? So there are 3 options that I will give you that you can use if this happens to you. So the first option is going to be path of least resistance. You're just going to get the heck out of there and transfer to a new school. Now, again, I did talk about the fact that if you are especially an F1 student at a college or university, depending on whenever this particular event would happen, you will have to go through the application process and then transfer, let's say, in the next semester. Whereas a lot of, let's say, private high schools, boarding schools, they may take you right away, depending on what their particular bandwidth is. But that's going to be the first solution. Like, you don't want to stick around too long once something has gone down. You want to make sure that you are out of Dodge and that you're able to move forward. As I mentioned before, understanding what the school has to provide you with. So let's say the school is like the one in New York where they were closing down, but they were able to help students. Is the school able to provide you with letters of recommendation or a letter sort of stating why it happened or being able to help you with that? Or are you going to have to go it along alone? If you are having to go it alone, it's going to be harder, but you are able to plead your case of what's going on when you apply. And again, the education space is large, but it's also small. So if a school has shut down or something nefarious has gone down, they understand why students may be applying. So you want to just be able to also articulate that in your statement of purpose or in your essay. If you have not watched that video, definitely do so. But the other thing as well, too, that another option that students don't always think about is that you can apply for a different visa for a temporary set of time. So you could get on a tourist visa. If you have an opportunity, you could also get on a dependent visa. This would be for a short period of time, so maybe for 3 months of time, to be able to fill that gap to allow you to stay in the U.S. while you figure something else out. It would not be my first recommendation. I feel that it's best that just understanding how visas work and having had so many of them myself outside of the US, that a visa is very hard to obtain. People think it's just simple, easy. It's really hard because, again, you go through this entire process, and once you get it, you want to hold on to it because you want to have the terms and conditions stay how they are. And if you go back and switch, then something changes, and I understand all of that. And so the part that I recommend is try to get to a different school that has the certification as quickly as possible. But if you cannot, or if you need to regroup yourself, switching to a different visa might allow you to do that. And depending on what the situation is of why the certification is no longer allowed at the other school, it should be a lot easier for you to do that. The third option, which I know is not going to be your favorite option, but is a likely possibility, is that you may need to leave the US and reapply. And I know that that can be really hard for people because, again, with international students, especially if you're coming to a place like the US, but even if you're places like the UK, wherever, like you have put so much work in and it's been a huge expense and you've done a lot of this work. A lot of times, like you are paying the full price yourself, or your parents are, you're paying for all of this other auxiliary stuff. And so I understand that that's going to be difficult, but it actually might be a little bit easier for you if you're able to, let's say, even if you, because there are some colleges and universities and even some boarding schools, private schools, that they only accept students in, let's say this happened to you, whatever this event is, it happened to you in February. And a lot of schools, they won't take you in the middle of everything. And so that means you have to wait till September. If you're not able to switch over to a different visa and your certification is gone, you know how I feel about students staying on their visa. We know that now, at least from until at least 2029, that the particular administration is a lot more tougher on visas. So they are going to catch you and you are going to have to leave. So I would recommend doing that on your own, and if you have to, and leaving, and then coming back, applying to a different school, and then just doing it that way. So that would be my recommendation. But again, that would be my third choice for you. I always like to say, just give it a chance. And again, try and apply to another school while you're still here. It's likely going to be a lot easier for you. So what I'm actually going to do is I am going to link below the current in totality list of SEVP schools. So this includes high schools, colleges, and any other type of school, because even some kids, they come for barber school. So I'm going to link that below so that you can check that out. Again, it's really important to advocate for yourself and to ask questions. It's something that I feel very strongly about. And with international students, you're already paying even more money than foreign or current born than students that are born in the country. I cannot talk today. But it's really important to be able to do that. And don't feel any shame, as I said, of reaching out to someone in admissions, reaching out to someone in the administration at your school to figure out what the status is. And again, reading those annual reports, figuring out things, a lot of the detail is going to be in a lot of that boring stuff of where, like, you know, they're writing all this information, but then suddenly in paragraph 3, you're like, actually, this school is in a lot of debt. I need to put this application in the trash and start over somewhere else. So just being aware of that. So I'm going to link that below so you understand if your school or the schools you're interested in applying to are on that list so that you know you're right on track. And as I said, if it's more of a brand name school, like if it's a boarding school like a Andover or Deerfield, or if it's a school even like, I mean, I shouldn't use Harvard, but Yale or Princeton or UT Austin, like they are going to do everything in their power to stay in the good graces because a lot rides on it, and these schools are the top of their game. But if it's a smaller school somewhere else, maybe there could be a potential for a risk. It doesn't mean that there are, but it means that there could be. So just keeping that in mind. So have you had any other, let's say, friends or people you know that have gone to schools that have lost their SEVP status? Is it something that you're worried about? If so, let's talk about it more in the comments. I hope this video was useful for you, and I will see you over in the next one.